If you enjoy slow burn horror that stays with you long after the lights come back on, consider subscribing. These stories don't rely on jump scares. They rely on something far worse. The feeling that what happened could happen to you. I was 23 on Christmas Eve, 2019. My parents had flown to Denver to spend the holiday with my sister and her newborn. I'd volunteered to stay behind and watch the house. We lived on 8 acres outside Traverse City, Michigan. Pine trees, snow, and silence. The nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road. I didn't mind being alone. I'd grown up in that house. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every draft from the windows. It felt safer than any apartment I could have rented in town. The snow started around 4 in the afternoon. Big, slow flakes that stuck to everything. By 6, the driveway was covered. I made myself dinner, leftover ham, mashed potatoes, and settled in to watch a movie. The house was warm. The tree lights blinked red and green in the corner of the living room. At 8:47 p.m., the power went out. Not a flicker. Just gone. The TV died mid-sentence. The lights cut. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The only light came from the fireplace and the glow of snow through the windows. I sat still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The house was old. Power outages weren't unusual, especially in winter. I got up, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark as I walked to the kitchen. I checked the breaker box in the hallway. Everything looked normal. I flipped the main breaker off and back on. Nothing happened. I called the power company. The automated message said they were aware of outages in the area due to weather. Estimated restoration, midnight. Fine. I could handle 3 hours. I went back to the living room and added more wood to the fire. The flames grew, casting long shadows across the walls. I sat on the couch with a blanket and my phone. Service was weak, but I could still scroll through messages. My mom had texted earlier asking how things were. I told her everything was fine. At 9:15 p.m., I heard something outside. Not wind, not branches. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Crunching through snow. I set my phone down and listened. The footsteps moved along the side of the house, toward the back door. Then they stopped. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window. I couldn't see anything, just snow and trees and darkness. I turned off my flashlight and waited. My breath fogged the glass. Nothing moved. I told myself it was a deer. We had them all the time. They'd come right up to the house looking for food. But deer don't walk like that. I went to the back door and checked the lock. It was bolted. I looked through the window. The porch light was out, obviously, but the snow reflected enough moonlight that I could see the backyard. There were no tracks leading to the door. I stepped back. At 9:43 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. Everything okay? Thought I'd check in. I typed back. All good. Power's out, but should be back by midnight. She replied almost immediately. Stay warm. Love you. I set the phone down and sat back on the couch. The fire crackled. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. At 10:02 p.m., I heard it again. Footsteps. This time they were on the front porch. I froze. My chest tightened. I didn't move. The footsteps were slow, even. They crossed from one end of the porch to the other. Then they stopped directly in front of the door. I waited. Nothing. I stood up and walked to the front hallway. The door was solid wood with a small window at the top. I couldn't see out without getting close. I took 3 steps forward, keeping my body to the side. I leaned in just enough to look through the glass. There was no one there, but there were footprints. Fresh ones, leading up the porch steps, stopping at the door. I backed away. My hand was shaking. I checked the lock again. Deadbolt. Chain. Both secure. I returned to the living room and picked up my phone. I thought about calling someone, my parents, a friend, the police. But what would I say? Someone walked on my porch? There were no signs of forced entry. No threats. Just footprints. I sat down and tried to steady my breathing. At 10:34 p.m., the knocking started. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. It came from the back door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knocking repeated. Same rhythm. Same force. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just patient. Then it stopped. I sat in the silence, staring at the hallway that led to the kitchen. The fire popped. My phone screen dimmed. At 10:58 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it. It rang 4 times before I answered. Hello. Silence. Hello. I said again. Still nothing. But the line was open. I could hear faint static. And something else. Breathing. I hung up. My hands were trembling. I checked the door locks again. Front door. Back door. Both locked. I looked out the windows. Nothing moved. At 11:21 p.m., the knocking returned. This time it was on the front door. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. I stood in the hallway, 10 feet from the door. The knocking repeated. I didn't answer. I didn't look through the window. Then I heard it. A voice. Low. Calm. Muffled by the door. I know you're in there. My stomach dropped. The voice continued. It's cold out here. I didn't respond. I backed into the living room, keeping my eyes on the door. The knocking stopped. The voice stopped. At 11:47 p.m., I heard footsteps again. They circled the house. Slow. Methodical. I tracked the sound as it moved from the front porch to the side of the house, then to the back, then around to the other side. It made a full loop. Then it stopped at the basement window. The basement window faced the driveway. It was small, just above ground level, with a rusted latch on the inside. I hadn't thought about it in years. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, staring down into the darkness. I could hear something moving down there. Not footsteps. Something scraping. Metal on metal. The latch. Someone was trying to open the window. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The call connected, but the line was silent. No ring. No operator. Just dead air. I hung up and tried again. Same thing. No service. I checked the signal bars. 0. I looked at the time. 11:52 p.m. The scraping stopped. I waited at the top of the stairs, holding my breath. The house was silent except for the fire. Then I heard it. A voice. From a basement. Let me in. It was calm. Almost polite. But it wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I backed away, staring at the door. I could hear movement on the other side. Footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow. Climbing. They reached the top. The door handle turned. I didn't move. It stopped. Silence. At 11:58 p.m., every door in the house began to rattle. Front door. Back door. Basement door. All at once. The handles turned. The locks held. But the rattling didn't stop. It was rhythmic. Purposeful. Like someone was testing them. Learning them. Then, at exactly midnight, everything stopped. The rattling ceased. The footsteps were gone. The house fell into complete silence. I stood in the living room, my phone clutched in my hand, staring at the doors. Nothing moved. The fire had burned low. The only sound was my breathing. At 12:03 a.m., the power came back on. The lights flickered to life. The refrigerator hummed. The TV blared, still on the same channel from hours ago. I jumped and turned it off. The house looked normal. Warm. Safe. I walked to the front door and looked through the window. The porch was empty. I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The footprints were gone. The snow on the porch was smooth. Undisturbed. Like no one had walked there at all. I checked the back door. Same thing. No prints. No marks. I went down to the basement. The window was closed. The latch was in place. Locked from the inside. There was no sign anyone had touched it. I sat on the couch and called my mom. She answered on the second ring. Hey, sweetie. Everything okay? Yeah, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Power just came back on. Good. We were worried about you. Get some sleep, okay? Okay. I hung up and sat in the silence. The tree lights blinked. The fire crackled. Everything was normal. I stayed awake until sunrise. When my parents came home 2 days later, I didn't tell them what happened. I told them the power went out, and I'd kept the fire going. My dad checked the breaker box and said everything looked fine. My mom asked if I'd been scared. I said no. 3 weeks later, I moved out. I got an apartment in town. I told my parents I wanted to be closer to work. They understood. But before I left, I went down to the basement one more time. The window latch was broken. It was bent outward, like it had been forced, from the inside. Christmas Eve, 2021. I was house-sitting for my aunt and uncle in rural Vermont. They'd gone to visit family in Boston and wouldn't be back until the 27th. The house was a two-story colonial built in the 1800s, set back from the road by a long gravel driveway. The nearest house was a quarter-mile through the woods. I arrived at 3 p.m. The sky was already dimming. My aunt had left instructions on the kitchen counter. Feed the cat, water the plants, keep the heat at 68. Simple enough. The cat, a gray tabby named Smokey, watched me from the top of the stairs as I brought my bag inside. The house was warm, clean. It smelled like pine and cinnamon. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner of the living room, decorated with white lights and old ornaments. I turned on the TV and made myself comfortable on the couch. At 6:15 p.m., I fed Smokey. He ate quickly, then sat by the back door and meowed. "You want out?" I asked. He meowed again. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Smokey stepped onto the porch, looked around, then came right back inside. He walked past me without a sound and disappeared upstairs. I closed the door and locked it. At 7:30 p.m., I made dinner. Soup from a can. Toast. I ate at the kitchen table and scrolled through my phone. My aunt had texted earlier asking if I'd made it okay. I told her I had. She sent back a smiley face and told me to help myself to anything in the fridge. At 8:02 p.m., Smokey started acting strange. He came downstairs and sat in the middle of the living room, staring at the front door. His ears were flat. His tail twitched. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. I got up and looked out the window. The driveway was empty. The porch light cast a yellow glow across the snow. Nothing moved. I sat back down. Smokey stayed where he was. At 8:34 p.m., I heard a car. It was faint at first, then louder. Tires crunching on gravel. I stood and walked to the window. Headlights swept through the trees. A car was coming up the driveway. I watched as it pulled up to the house and stopped. The engine idled. The headlights stayed on, pointing directly at the front door. I waited. No one got out. The car just sat there. Engine running. Lights on. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. My aunt hadn't mentioned anyone stopping by. I walked to the front door and looked through the window. The headlights were too bright. I couldn't see inside the car. I waited another minute. Then the car reversed. Slowly, it backed down the driveway, turned around, and drove away. I stood at the door, watching the taillights disappear through the trees. Smokey was still sitting in the living room, still staring at the door. At 9:11 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Hello." Silence. "Hello." I said again. The line clicked off. I set the phone down and checked the locks. Front door, back door, both secure. At 9:48 p.m., the car came back. I heard it before I saw it. The same sound. Gravel. Engine. Headlights swept through the windows. I looked outside. The car was in the driveway again. Same position. Engine running. Lights on. This time I didn't wait. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The operator answered immediately. 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's a car in my driveway," I said. "I don't know who it is. They're just sitting there. Are you in danger?" "I don't know. They're not getting out. They've been here twice." "What's your address?" I gave it to her. She told me to stay inside and keep the doors locked. A deputy was on the way. I stayed at the window, watching. The car didn't move. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. At 10:04 p.m., the car reversed again. Slowly, it backed down the driveway and disappeared. At 10:19 p.m., a sheriff's deputy pulled into the driveway. I met him at the door. He was young, maybe 30, with a flashlight and a calm expression. "You called about a car?" he asked. "Yeah, it was here twice. Just sitting in the driveway with the lights on. No one got out." He nodded and walked around the property, checking the perimeter with his flashlight. I stayed on the porch, watching. He came back a few minutes later. "No signs of anyone," he said. "No footprints except yours. Could have been someone lost or looking for an address." "They came back twice," I said. "I understand. I'll make a note and increase patrols in the area tonight. You have my number if anything else happens." He handed me a card and left. I went back inside. Smokey was under the couch now. I could see his eyes glowing in the dark. At 10:52 p.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, moving from one end to the other. I stood in the hallway, staring at the front door. The footsteps stopped. 3 knocks. I didn't move. 3 more knocks. I walked to the door and looked through the window. There was no one there, but there were footprints in the snow, leading up the steps, stopping at the door. At 11:27 p.m., the phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered. Silence. Then breathing. Who is this? I said. The breathing continued. Slow. Even. Then a voice. I'm outside. The line went dead. I checked every window, every door. I saw nothing. No one. At 11:53 p.m., the back door handle started to turn. I was in the kitchen when I saw it. The handle turned slowly, testing the lock. Then it stopped. I backed into the hallway, keeping my eyes on the door. The handle didn't move again. I pulled out my phone and called the deputy. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I hung up and tried again. Same thing. I texted instead. Someone's trying to get in. Back door. No response. At 11:56 p.m., I heard scratching. It came from the back door. Not frantic, deliberate, like nails dragging slowly down the wood. I stood frozen in the hallway, phone in hand. The scratching continued for 15 seconds. Then it stopped. Silence. At 11:59 p.m., all the lights went out. Not just inside. The porch light. The neighbors' lights through the trees. Everything. The only light came from the Christmas tree in the living room and the glow of snow through the windows. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it across the kitchen. Nothing moved. I walked to the living room and checked the front door. Still locked. I looked out the window. Someone was standing in the driveway. A figure. Tall. Wearing dark clothing. Just standing there. Facing the house. I stepped back from the window. My heart was pounding. I watched through the edge of the curtain. The figure didn't move. At exactly midnight, it took 1 step forward. Then another. Slow. Even. Walking toward the house. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The call wouldn't connect. No service. I ran to the back door and checked the lock. Still secure. I went to the front door. The figure was closer now. Halfway up the driveway. I backed into the center of the living room. Smokey was nowhere to be seen. The figure reached the porch steps. It stopped. I could see it clearly now through the window. A man. Tall. Wearing a dark coat. His face was obscured by shadow. He stood at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the door. Then he climbed them, 1 step at a time. He stopped at the door. 3 knocks. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. 3 more knocks. Then his voice, muffled by the door, but clear enough. I know you're in there. My hands were shaking. I looked around for something, anything to defend myself with. I grabbed a fireplace poker from the living room and held it with both hands. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard him at the window, tapping on the glass. I turned. He was there, face pressed against the window, looking directly at me. His face was pale, expressionless. His eyes were dark and empty. He tapped again, slowly, 3 times. I backed toward the kitchen. He moved with me, walking along the outside of the house, tapping on each window as he passed. He reached the back door. The handle turned. I raised the poker. The handle turned again, harder this time. Then it stopped. At 12:08 a.m., the lights came back on. Every light in the house. The porch light. The neighbor's lights. Everything blazed alive at once. I blinked against the sudden brightness. I ran to the back door and looked through the window. No one was there. I ran to the front door. Empty. I checked every window, every door. There was no one outside. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The air was freezing. The driveway was empty. I looked for footprints. There were none. The snow was smooth, untouched, like no one had walked there at all. I went back inside and locked the door. My phone buzzed. A text from the deputy. Sorry, was on another call. Everything okay? I stared at the message. My hands were still shaking. I typed back, false alarm. Sorry. He replied, no problem. Call if you need anything. I sat on the couch and waited for morning. Smokey eventually came out from under the couch and curled up next to me. I didn't sleep. When my aunt and uncle came home on the 27th, I told them everything had been fine. Quiet. No problems. My uncle checked the doors and said everything looked normal. My aunt asked if I'd been scared staying alone. I said no, but before I left, I asked my uncle if anyone else had a key to the house. Just us, he said. Why? No reason, I said. Just curious. I drove home and didn't come back for 6 months. When I finally visited again in June, I was helping my uncle clean out the garage. We found something in a box of old tools. A dark coat, folded neatly. My uncle pulled it out and frowned. "This isn't mine," he said. He held it up. It was too big for him, and it smelled like snow. Christmas Eve, 2020. I was 26 and working the overnight shift at a gas station outside Bangor, Maine. It was supposed to be my night off, but Derek called in sick at the last minute. The manager offered me double time to cover. I said yes. The station sat alone on Route 15, surrounded by woods. We got truckers mostly, the occasional local. After 10 p.m., traffic dropped to almost nothing. I clocked in at 10:45 p.m. Derek left without saying much. He looked tired. The station was quiet, clean. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. At 11:02 p.m., a truck pulled in. The driver filled up, paid with a card at the pump, and left. I watched his taillights disappear down the highway. At 11:34 p.m., a sedan pulled up to pump 3. A woman got out, middle-aged. She pumped her gas, came inside, and bought a coffee and a pack of gum. She didn't make eye contact, didn't speak except to say thank you. She left. The station was empty again. At 11:58 p.m., the phone rang. I picked it up. "Gateway Gas, how can I help you?" Silence. "Hello," I said. The line clicked off. I hung up and went back to restocking the cigarette shelves behind the counter. At 12:14 a.m., the phone rang again. I answered. "Gateway Gas." Silence. Then breathing. I hung up. At 12:22 a.m., a car pulled into the parking lot. It didn't go to pumps. It parked near the air machine, facing the building. The headlights stayed on. I watched from behind the counter. The engine was running. No one got out. 2 minutes passed. The car didn't move. I walked to the window and tried to see inside. The headlights were too bright. I couldn't make out the driver. At 12:27 a.m., the car turned off its lights. The engine kept running. I could see the exhaust rising in the cold air. I went back to the counter and kept watching. The car sat there, dark, idling. At 12:35 a.m., it drove away. Slowly, it turned onto the highway and disappeared. I told myself it was someone checking their phone, resting. Nothing strange. At 12:41 a.m., the phone rang again. I stared at it. 4 rings. 5. I picked it up. Gateway Gas. Breathing. Slow. Even. "Who is this?" I asked. The breathing continued. Then a voice. "Male. Calm. Are you alone?" I hung up immediately. My hands were shaking. I checked the locks on the front door. They were automatic, locked from the outside after 10 p.m. Customers had to be buzzed in. I was safe. I looked out the window. The parking lot was empty. The highway was dark. At 12:53 a.m., I saw someone standing at the edge of the lot, near the tree line, just standing there, facing the building. I couldn't see details, just a silhouette, tall, wearing something dark. I stepped back from the window. My chest tightened. The figure didn't move. I watched for a full minute. It just stood there. Then it took one step forward. I backed toward the counter and picked up my phone. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? Someone standing in the parking lot. At 1:07 a.m., the figure was closer. It had moved without me seeing it. Now it was near the air machine, still facing the building. I could see more detail now. A man, tall, wearing a dark jacket. His hands were at his sides. His face was in shadow. He stood completely still. At 1:14 a.m., he walked to the front door. Slow, deliberate. He stopped directly in front of the glass. He looked at me. His face was pale, expression blank. He didn't blink. He raised one hand and knocked. 3 times. I didn't move. He knocked again. Same rhythm. Then he spoke. His voice was muffled by the glass, but clear enough. "Let me in." I shook my head. He tilted his head slightly, like he was confused. "It's cold," he said. "We're closed," I said. My voice was shaking. "No, you're not." He was right. The open sign was still lit. The station was 24 hours. "I can't let you in," I said. He stared at me. Didn't move. Then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too deliberate. "I'll wait," he said. He stepped back from the door and walked to the side of the building. Out of sight. At 1:22 a.m., I heard banging. It came from the back. The storage room. Someone was hitting the metal door. 3 bangs. Pause. 3 more. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The operator answered. "There's someone trying to get into the gas station," I said. "I'm alone. He's at the back door." "What's your location?" I gave her the address. She told me to stay inside and away from the doors. A deputy was on the way. The banging stopped. At 1:29 a.m., I heard footsteps on the roof. Slow, heavy, moving from one end to the other. I looked up at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights flickered. The footsteps stopped directly above me. At 1:34 a.m., the power went out. The lights died. The refrigerators stopped humming. The only light came from the faint glow of the highway and my phone. I turned on the flashlight and swept it across the store. Everything was still, silent. I heard tapping on the glass. I turned. The man was at the front door again, tapping with one finger. He was smiling. "Let me in," he said. At 1:41 a.m., I saw headlights. A sheriff's cruiser pulled into the parking lot. I nearly collapsed with relief. The deputy got out and walked toward the building. The man at the door didn't move, didn't react. The deputy stopped a few feet from him. "Sir, step away from the door." The man turned his head slowly, looked at the deputy, then back at me. He smiled again. Then he walked away, slowly, toward the tree line. The deputy followed him with his flashlight. "Sir, I need you to stop." The man kept walking. He reached the trees and disappeared into the darkness. The deputy came to the door. I buzzed him in. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. My voice was barely steady. He checked the back room, the roof access, everything. He found nothing. "Power's out across this whole stretch," he said. "Should be back soon. I'll stay until it comes on." At 1:58 a.m., the power returned. The lights flickered to life. The refrigerators hummed. Everything was normal. The deputy stayed for another 20 minutes. He drove around the property with his spotlight. Found nothing. "Call if he comes back," he said. He left. At 2:31 a.m., the phone rang. I stared at the phone. It rang 4 times before I picked it up. Gateway Gas. Breathing. "Who is this?" I said. The voice came through. "Calm. Even. You should have let me in." The line went dead. I set the phone down. My hands were shaking. I looked out at the parking lot. Empty. I checked every window. Nothing moved. At 2:44 a.m., I heard scratching. It came from the front door. Not loud, just persistent, like fingernails dragging down the glass. I turned. The man was there, face pressed against the window, eyes locked on mine. He dragged his fingers down the glass. Slowly. The sound made my skin crawl. I backed toward the counter. He kept scratching. His smile never changed. Then he stopped. He pressed both palms flat against the glass. Leaned closer. His breath fogged the window. "I know you," he said. My stomach dropped. "I've been watching you," he continued. "Every night. You come here. You work alone. You think you're safe." I didn't respond. Couldn't. He tilted his head. "You're not." At 2:51 a.m., he walked away from the door. I watched him cross the parking lot. He didn't go toward the trees this time. He walked to the side of the building, to the storage room door. I heard metal scraping, the door handle. I ran to the back and looked through the small window in the storage room door. He was there, working on the lock with something. I couldn't see what. I called 911 again. The operator answered. "He's back," I said. "He's trying to break in through the back." "Stay on the line." "Deputy's 15 minutes out." 15 minutes. The scraping stopped. I looked through the window. He was gone. At 2:58 a.m., I heard him on the roof again. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Moving toward the front of the building. They stopped above the entrance. I heard something else. Metal shifting. Then a scraping sound. Long, continuous. He was prying at the roof vent. At 3:03 a.m., the vent cover fell. It crashed onto the floor in the storage room. I heard it clearly. The metal clanging against concrete. I grabbed the only weapon I could find, a tire iron from behind the counter. I held it with both hands and backed into the corner where I could see both doors. I heard movement in the storage room. Something dropping. Then footsteps. Inside the building. At 3:06 a.m., the storage room door opened. He stood in the doorway. Tall. Pale. Smiling. "I told you I'd get in," he said. I raised the tire iron. "Stay back." He took one step forward, then another. "The police are coming," I said. "I know." He kept walking. Slow. Steady. I backed toward the front door. My hand found the lock. I turned it. The door opened. I ran outside into the freezing air. I didn't stop. I ran across the parking lot toward the highway. Behind me, I heard the door open. Footsteps. Running now. I looked back. He was chasing me. Fast. I reached the highway and kept running. The pavement was icy. I nearly slipped. Then I saw headlights. The sheriff's cruiser. I waved my arms. The cruiser skidded to a stop. The deputy jumped out. "He's inside," I shouted. He broke in through the roof. The deputy drew his weapon and ran toward the station. I followed at a distance, staying near the cruiser. He entered the building. I watched through the window. He swept his flashlight through the store. The storage room. Nothing. He came back out 3 minutes later. "There's no one in there," he said. "He was inside," I said. "I saw him. He chased me." I checked everywhere. Storage room. Bathroom. Behind the counter. No one's there. The roof vent. He pulled it off. The deputy went back inside. I followed. He checked the storage room. The vent cover was on the floor, exactly where I'd heard it fall. But when he climbed up to check, the vent itself was intact, bolted in place. No signs of tampering. "This could have fallen from vibration," he said. "The bolts up top are fine." "That's impossible." I heard him. "I'm not saying you didn't hear something, but there's no one here now." He walked me through the entire building. Every room, every corner. No one. He checked outside, used his spotlight to scan the trees, the parking lot, the roof. No footprints except mine and his. No signs of entry. Nothing. At 3:47 a.m., another deputy arrived. They both stayed until my manager came at 5 a.m. I gave a statement, told them everything. They wrote it all down. When my manager arrived, I told him I couldn't work there anymore. He understood. He told me to take a few days. I never went back. I picked up my last paycheck a week later. During the day, I didn't go inside. I waited in the parking lot until my manager brought it out to me. He told me Derek had quit too, 2 days before my shift. Said he'd seen someone watching the station at night, standing in the trees. He hadn't told anyone because he thought he was imagining it. 3 weeks later, I drove past the station during the day. There was a for lease sign out front. It had closed. My manager told me later that after I left, the overnight workers kept reporting the same thing. Someone at the windows. Footsteps on the roof. Calls with no one on the line. No one would work the night shift anymore. I still drive past it sometimes. The building is empty now. Windows dark. Pumps covered. But last month, late at night, I drove by and saw something. A car parked near the air machine. Headlights on. Engine running. No one inside. Christmas Eve, 2018. I was house-sitting for my professor while he and his family spent the holidays in Florida. The house was in northern New Hampshire, about 40 minutes outside of Concord. It sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by forest. The closest neighbor was 2 miles away. I arrived at 4:30 p.m. The sun was already setting. My professor had left detailed instructions on the counter. Thermostat, security system code, where to find the spare keys. He had 2 dogs, both labs. They greeted me at the door, tails wagging. The house was nice. Modern. Large windows overlooking the woods. A fireplace in the living room. I brought my things upstairs to the guest room and settled in. At 6:15 p.m., I fed the dogs. They ate quickly, then both went to the back door and whined. I let them out into the fenced yard. They ran around for a few minutes, then both stopped at the same time. They stood completely still, staring at the tree line. "What is it?" I called. They didn't move. Their ears were back. The larger one, Max, started growling. I walked to the edge of the deck. I couldn't see anything in the trees. Just darkness. "Max, come on." He didn't respond. Both dogs kept staring. Then they bolted back toward the house. They pushed past me through the door and went straight to the living room. They sat side by side, facing the back door. I closed and locked it. At 7:20 p.m., I made dinner. Pasta. I ate at the kitchen table while the dogs lay nearby. They were calmer now, but still alert. Their heads would lift every few minutes, ears turning toward sounds I couldn't hear. At 8:03 p.m., my professor texted me. "Everything going okay?" "Dogs behaving." I replied, all good. Fed them and let them out. They're a little on edge, but fine. He wrote back, they don't like the dark. Keep them inside after sunset. I looked at the dogs. Both were staring at the back windows now. At 8:34 p.m., I heard something outside. Not wind, not animals. Footsteps, crunching through snow. The dog stood up immediately. Max started barking. Deep, aggressive barks. I went to the window and looked out. The motion sensor floodlight had turned on. It illuminated the backyard and part of the driveway. I saw nothing. The footsteps stopped. Max kept barking. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. He was fixated on the back door. At 8:41 p.m., the floodlight turned off. The backyard went dark. The footsteps started again. Closer this time, moving along the side of the house. I checked the front windows. Nothing. I checked the side windows. The motion light on that side hadn't turned on. The footsteps stopped directly outside the living room window. Max and the other dog, Lucy, were both barking now. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I swept it across the window. Nothing there. At 8:56 p.m., someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. The dogs went silent. They backed away from the door, tails tucked. I walked to the hallway and looked through the peephole. The porch light was on. I could see the front steps clearly. No one was there. I checked the security system panel. It showed all doors and windows secure. No alerts. At 9:12 p.m., the knocking happened again. This time on the back door. 3 knocks. Same rhythm. I walked to the kitchen and looked through the window. The floodlight was on again. The backyard was empty. The dogs were in the living room now, pressed against the couch. Lucy was shaking. I called my professor. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hey, everything okay? Yeah, I think so. The dogs are really spooked. And I keep hearing noises outside. What kind of noises? Footsteps. Knocking. But there's no one there. He was quiet for a moment. Could be animals. Sometimes deer come right up to the house. Maybe. The security system working okay? Yeah, everything's armed. Good. You're safe inside. If anything seems off, call the police. I'm sure it's nothing, but better safe than sorry. We hung up. I checked all the doors again. All locked. At 9:38 p.m., the doorbell rang. I froze. The dogs started barking again. I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. No one. I opened the door, just a crack, keeping the chain lock engaged. The porch was empty. I looked left and right. Nothing moved. Then I looked down. There were footprints in the snow, leading up to the door. Fresh ones, but no footprints leading away. I closed the door quickly and locked it. At 9:54 p.m., I heard something on the roof. Heavy footsteps, moving from one end to the other. The dogs were going insane. Max was barking so loud, I could barely think. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? I'm house sitting and someone's on the roof. The dogs are going crazy. I think someone's trying to break in. What's your address? I gave it to her. She told me to stay inside, away from windows and doors. A deputy was on the way. The footsteps on the roof stopped. At 10:11 p.m., I heard scratching. It came from the back door. Long, slow scrapes, like nails dragging down the wood. I stood in the hallway with the dogs. They had stopped barking. They were both pressed against my legs, trembling. The scratching continued for 30 seconds, then stopped. Silence. At 10:23 p.m., I saw lights. A sheriff's cruiser pulled into the driveway. I'd never been so relieved in my life. The deputy got out and walked around the property with his flashlight. I watched from the window. He checked the back, the sides, the roof access. He came to the front door. I let him in. You called about someone on the roof? He asked. Yes. And knocking. Footsteps. The dogs heard it too. He looked at Max and Lucy. They were calmer now, but still watchful. I checked the perimeter. No signs of forced entry. No footprints except yours. Did you go outside recently? Just to the front door? To look. There were footprints on the porch. Can I see? We went outside. He shone his flashlight on the porch. The snow was disturbed near the door. My footprints. But no others. These are just yours, he said. There were others. Leading to the door. He looked at me carefully. Ma'am, I'm not saying you didn't hear something. Old houses make noise. Animals get on roofs. The holidays can be stressful when you're alone. I'm not imagining this. I'll file a report. If anything else happens, Call immediately. I'll have someone drive by a few times tonight." He left. At 10:47 p.m., the phone inside the house rang. I walked to it. An old landline on the kitchen wall. I picked it up. "Hello." Silence. "Hello." I said again. Then a voice. "Mail." "Calm. I'm still here." The line went dead. At 11:18 p.m., all the lights went out. The house went completely dark. No power. The heat shut off. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The only light came from my phone and the faint glow of snow through the windows. The dogs were beside me, pressed against my legs. I could feel them shaking. I checked the breaker box in the basement hallway. I didn't want to go down there, but I had no choice. I opened the door and shone my flashlight down the stairs. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor. Exposed beams. The breaker box was on the far wall. I descended slowly. The dogs wouldn't follow. They stayed at the top of the stairs, whining. I reached the breaker box and opened it. Everything looked normal. I flipped the main breaker off and back on. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. Then I heard it. Above me. Footsteps on the main floor. Slow. Deliberate. Walking through the house. I froze. The dogs had gone silent. The footsteps moved from the living room toward the kitchen. Then they stopped. Directly above me. I turned off my flashlight and stood in the darkness. I could hear my own breathing. My heart pounding. The footsteps started again, moving toward the basement door. I heard the door open. Light from a phone, not mine, appeared at the top of the stairs. Someone was there. I backed against the wall, pressing myself into the shadows. The light moved down the stairs. One step at a time. I could see a silhouette now. Tall, wearing dark clothing. The figure reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. The light swept across the basement. Slowly. Searching. I held my breath. The light passed over me. Stopped. Came back. It illuminated my face. I saw him clearly now. A man. Pale. Expressionless. He was holding a phone in one hand. He tilted his head. "Found you," he said. I ran. I pushed past him and bolted up the stairs. The dogs were at the top. I grabbed Max's collar and ran for the front door. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Running. I threw open the front door and pulled the dogs outside. The cold hit me immediately. I didn't have shoes. No coat. I ran down the driveway, toward the road. The dog stayed with me. I looked back. The man was standing in the doorway, watching, not chasing anymore. He raised one hand, waved. Then he stepped back inside and closed the door. At 11:34 p.m., I reached the road. I flagged down a passing car. An elderly couple. They pulled over immediately when they saw me, barefoot, panicked with two dogs. The woman got out. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" "Someone broke into the house. He's still in there. Please call the police." The man already had his phone out. He was calling 911. They let me sit in their car with the dogs while we waited. The heat was on. I was shaking uncontrollably. At 11:48 p.m., 3 sheriff's cruisers arrived. The deputies went into the house with weapons drawn. I watched from the car. The elderly couple stayed with me. 10 minutes later, one of the deputies came back. "There's no one inside," he said. "That's impossible." I saw him. He was in the basement. We checked every room. Basement, closets, attic. No signs of forced entry. Nothing disturbed. "The power's out." "Power's on. Everything's working." I stared at him. "What?" "The lights are on. Heat's running. Everything's normal." I got out of the car and looked at the house. Every light was on, bright, like nothing had happened. The deputies searched the property, the woods around the house. They found nothing. No footprints except mine and the dogs. No signs anyone had been there. They took me inside. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Warm, secure. The security system was still armed. One deputy walked me through the basement. I showed him where I'd been, where the man had stood. "You're sure about what you saw?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded slowly. Sometimes when people are alone in unfamiliar places, especially at night, the mind can play tricks. Stress, isolation. I'm not making this up. I'm not saying you are. I'm saying it's a possibility. There's no evidence anyone was here. At 12:36 a.m., the deputies left. They offered to take me to a hotel. I said yes. The elderly couple had already left, but not before making sure I had their number. I packed a bag, loaded the dogs into my car, and followed the deputy to a motel 10 miles away. I didn't sleep. At 8 a.m. the next morning, my professor called. The deputies had contacted him. He was concerned. He told me to leave the keys with the neighbor and that he'd cut his trip short. I drove back to the house during daylight. The neighbor met me there, an older man who lived 2 miles down the road. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just spooked. This house has always been strange," he said. I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Previous owners moved out after 6 months. So they heard things, saw things. Never said what exactly." "Why didn't my professor mention that?" The neighbor shrugged. "He's only been here 2 years. Maybe he hasn't experienced it. Or maybe he doesn't believe in that sort of thing." I left the keys and drove home with the dogs. My professor called me 3 days later. He said the house was fine. Everything was in order. He thanked me and paid me for the full week, even though I'd only stayed one night. He told me he'd asked the neighbors and the previous owners. No one had reported anything unusual. But 2 weeks later, he called me again. He'd been reviewing the security camera footage. The system recorded continuously. Even when the power was out, it had a battery backup. He asked if I wanted to see it. I said no, but he told me anyway. The footage showed me arriving, letting the dogs out, making dinner, everything normal. At 11:34 p.m., the moment I ran outside, the camera captured something. A figure standing in the living room. Tall, dark clothing, facing the camera. But the timestamp on the footage was wrong. It showed 3:47 a.m., 4 hours in the future. My professor couldn't explain it. The camera's internal clock was working correctly. The file wasn't corrupted. He deleted the footage. He sold the house 6 months later. Christmas Eve, 2017. I was staying in my grandfather's cabin in northern Montana. He'd passed away in October, and my parents asked me to check on the property over the holidays. Make sure the pipes hadn't frozen. Clear any snow from the porch. Basic maintenance. I drove up on the afternoon of the 24th. The cabin was 30 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a logging road that hadn't been plowed. I had to park at the bottom and hike the last mile in. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pines. Small, 1 bedroom, a wood stove, no electricity. My grandfather had lived there every summer for 40 years. I arrived at 3:45 p.m. The door was locked. I used the key my mother had given me. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. Dust on the furniture, books on the shelves, his reading glasses on the table. It felt wrong being there without him. I started a fire in the stove and checked the pipes. Everything was intact. I swept the floor and wiped down the counters. By the time I finished, it was dark outside. At 6:20 p.m., I made dinner. Canned soup heated on the stove. I ate sitting at the small table, using my phone's flashlight to see. There was no cell service, but I downloaded some books to read. At 7:15 p.m., I heard something outside. Footsteps, crunching through snow. I set down my book and listened. The footsteps circled the cabin. Slow, deliberate. They stopped at the front door. I waited. 3 knocks. I stood up and walked to the door. There was no peephole, no window, just solid wood. "Who is it?" I called. No answer. I checked the lock. It was secure. I stepped back. 3 more knocks. I said, "Who is it?" Silence. The footsteps started again, moving around to the back of the cabin. I went to the back window and looked out. I couldn't see anything, just darkness and trees. At 7:33 p.m., I heard something on the roof. Movement, like someone crawling. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The cold hit me immediately. I swept the beam across the roof. Nothing. I walked around the cabin, checking every side. No footprints except mine. No ladder. No way anyone could have climbed up. I went back inside and locked the door. At 8:01 p.m., the knocking started again, this time on the back door. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. I didn't respond. I sat at the table and tried to focus on my book. The knocking continued. Same rhythm, over and over. Then it stopped. At 8:24 p.m., I heard my grandfather's voice. "Let me in." It came from outside the front door. Clear, unmistakable. My chest tightened. I stood up slowly. "It's cold out here," the voice said. It sounded exactly like him. The same tone, the same cadence. "Please," the voice continued. I forgot my key. I walked to the door. My hand hovered over the lock. "Grandpa," I said. "Yes." "Open the door." I stepped back. My grandfather was dead. I'd been at his funeral. "Please," the voice said again. I'm freezing. I didn't answer. I backed away from the door. The voice changed. It became angry. "Open this door." I went to the far corner of the cabin. Away from the windows. Away from the doors. "Open it now." The door handle rattled. Hard. The wood shook. Then it stopped. At 8:47 p.m., I heard scratching. It came from all sides. The walls. The door. The windows. Long, dragging scrapes. I covered my ears. The sound was overwhelming. Then it stopped. Silence. At 9:13 p.m., something hit the window. A loud thud. I jumped. I turned and saw a crack spreading across the glass. Something hit it again. The crack widened. I grabbed my bag and moved to the bedroom. It was smaller. Only one window. I could defend it better. I closed the door and pushed the bed against it. At 9:35 p.m., the front window shattered. I heard the glass break. Cold air rushed in. I stayed in the bedroom. Silent. Listening. Footsteps. Inside the cabin now. Slow. Heavy. Moving through the main room. They stopped at the bedroom door. The handle turned. The door pushed against the bed. I braced myself against it. The pushing stopped. Then I heard my grandfather's voice again. Right outside the door. "Why won't you let me in?" I didn't answer. "I just want to come home." The door pushed again. Harder this time. The bed scraped across the floor. At 10:02 p.m., I heard something I'll never forget. Breathing. On the other side of the door. Deep. Ragged. Then laughter. Not my grandfather's laugh. Something else. Low. Wrong. The door pushed again. The bed moved another inch. At 10:28 p.m., I called out. "What do you want?" The breathing stopped. Then the voice answered. "I want you to open the door." "What?" Silence. "Because I'm hungry." At 10:51 p.m., the pushing stopped. The footsteps moved away from the door. They walked back through the cabin. I heard the front door open. Then close. Silence. I didn't move. I stayed pressed against the bed, waiting. At 11:34 p.m., I heard an engine. A vehicle. Getting closer. I went to the window and looked out. Headlights cut through the trees. A truck pulled into the clearing. My uncle. He got out and looked at the cabin. At the broken window. "Hello," he called. I moved the bed and opened the bedroom door. The main room was empty. The front door was closed. Snow had blown in through the broken window. I ran outside. "Uncle Jim." He turned. "Jesus Christ, what happened? Are you okay?" Someone was here. They broke the window. They tried to get in. He walked to the cabin and looked inside. He checked every corner. The bedroom. The bathroom. Nothing. Where are they now? I don't know. They left. I heard the door. He checked outside with his flashlight. No footprints except mine and his. "The window's broken from the inside," he said. I looked. He was right. The glass had fallen outward. "That's impossible. Something hit it from outside." He didn't argue. He helped me gather my things. "You shouldn't have come up here alone," he said. "Your mom told me you were planning to stay the night." I had a bad feeling. "Why?" He hesitated. "Your grandfather, the last few months before he died, he stopped coming up here. Said something wasn't right. Said the cabin didn't feel like his anymore." "What do you mean?" He never explained. Just said he felt watched. Heard things. We loaded my bag into his truck. Before we left, I took one last look at the cabin. The front door was open. I'd watched my uncle close it. At 11:52 p.m., we drove away. My uncle drove in silence for the first few minutes. The logging road was dark, narrow. His headlights barely cut through the trees. "Did you lock the door when we left?" I asked. "Yeah." "What?" "It was open." When I looked back, he glanced at me. "Wind, probably." There was no wind. He didn't respond. At 12:07 a.m., his truck started making a noise. A grinding sound from the engine. He frowned and slowed down. "That's not good," he said. The truck sputtered. The headlights flickered. "Come on," he muttered, tapping the dashboard. The engine died. We rolled to a stop in the middle of the road. Darkness closed in around us. "Battery?" I asked. "Shouldn't be. I just replaced it." He turned the key. Nothing. Not even a click. He tried again. Same result. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove box and got out. I followed. The cold was brutal. Our breath fogged in the air. He opened the hood and examined the engine. I stood beside him, holding my phone for extra light. "Everything looks fine," he said. "I don't understand." Behind us, I heard something. Footsteps, crunching through snow. I turned. My phone light swept across the road. Nothing there. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" The footsteps continued, getting closer. "That." My uncle turned. He aimed his flashlight down the road. The beam reached maybe 30 feet. Beyond that, just darkness. "Probably an animal," he said. The footsteps stopped. We stood there listening. The forest was completely silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. Then we heard it. A voice, distant, coming from the direction of the cabin. "Come back." My uncle's hand tightened on his flashlight. The voice called again, louder this time. "Come back." "Get in the truck," my uncle said quietly. We climbed back inside. He locked the doors. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. "Come back." The voice was closer now. I looked out the rear window. I could see something moving in the darkness. A figure, walking down the road toward us. "Uncle Jim." "I see it." He tried the ignition again. And again. The engine wouldn't turn over. The figure was 50 feet away now. I could make out details. Tall, walking with an uneven gait. "Try it again," I said. He did. Still nothing. The figure was 30 feet away. It stopped. It stood in the middle of the road, just outside the reach of our taillights. We could see it clearly now. It looked like my grandfather. Same height, same build, wearing the flannel jacket he'd been buried in. My uncle went rigid beside me. "That's not possible," he whispered. The figure tilted its head, watching us. Then it smiled. My uncle turned the key one more time. The engine roared to life. He didn't hesitate. He put the truck in gear and hit the gas. The tires spun on the snow, then caught. We lurched forward. I looked back. The figure was running now, chasing us. It moved wrong, too fast. Its limbs jerked at odd angles. "Go faster," I said. My uncle floored it. The truck fishtailed on the icy road, but he kept control. The figure fell behind. Then it disappeared from view. We didn't slow down until we reached the main highway. At 12:34 a.m., we pulled into a gas station. My uncle parked under the lights and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. "What the hell was that?" I said. He didn't answer. He stared straight ahead. "Uncle Jim." "That wasn't him," he said finally. "That wasn't your grandfather." "I know. He's dead. I was at the funeral. I helped carry the casket." "I know," I said again. He looked at me. "We're not going back there. Ever." I nodded. We drove to his house in town. I stayed there for the rest of the night. Neither of us slept. At 8 a.m. on Christmas morning, my uncle called my father. He told him what happened. My father didn't believe him at first. Said we were both exhausted, that grief can make people see things. But my uncle insisted. He said he was going to sell the property. He didn't care what it was worth. He wanted nothing to do with it. My father drove up 2 days later to check on the cabin himself. My uncle refused to go with him. I refused too. My father went alone. He called us that evening. Said everything looked normal. The window was broken, but that was it. No signs of anyone being there. No disturbances. He boarded up the window and locked the doors. The property sat empty for 3 months. My father listed it for sale in March. No one made an offer. In June, a hiker found the cabin's front door wide open. The Forest Service checked it out. Everything inside had been destroyed. Furniture overturned. Books torn apart. The wood stove had been pulled from the wall. But there were no signs of forced entry. The locks were intact. The boarded window was still secure. The police investigated. They found nothing. No fingerprints. No evidence anyone had been inside. My father didn't list it again. He let the county take it for unpaid taxes. Last year, the cabin burned down. The Forest Service said it was likely caused by lightning, but there hadn't been any storms in the area. Just before the fire, a ranger reported seeing smoke coming from the chimney. But the wood stove had been removed 6 months earlier. Christmas Eve, 2019. I was watching my neighbor's house while they spent the holidays with family in Boston. The Hendersons lived 3 doors down from me in a quiet suburb outside Portland, Maine. Nice couple. 2 kids. They'd asked me 2 weeks earlier if I could check on things, water the plants, bring in the mail. I said yes. The house was a 2-story colonial. White siding, black shutters, a wreath on the front door. They'd left the key under the mat and told me to make myself at home. I went over at 5 p.m. The sun was already down. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was warm. They'd left the heat on. Christmas lights blinked on a tree in the living room. I checked the plants, watered the ones that needed it. I gathered the mail from the porch and set it on the kitchen counter. Everything was fine. I was about to leave when I noticed something. The basement door was open. Not wide, just a crack, like someone had opened it and forgotten to close it completely. I walked over and looked down. The basement was dark. I found the light switch and flipped it. A single bulb illuminated wooden stairs leading down. I descended carefully. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor. Storage boxes stacked against the walls. A washer and dryer in the corner. Nothing unusual. I turned off the light and went back upstairs. I closed the basement door firmly. At 5:47 p.m., I locked up and went home. At 8:15 p.m., Mrs. Henderson texted me. "Thanks for checking on things. Did everything look okay?" I replied, "All good. Watered plants and grabbed mail." She sent back a smiley face. At 9:30 p.m., I was watching TV when my phone rang. "Mrs. Henderson." "Hello." I answered. "Hi. Sorry to bother you. Our security camera just sent me an alert. It shows motion in the house." "Really? I locked everything when I left." "I know. Can you see anything on the live feed?" I opened the app she told me about. They had cameras in the living room and kitchen. I pulled up the living room feed. The lights were on. The Christmas tree was still lit. Everything looked normal. "I don't see anything," I said. The alert said it detected motion at 9:23. In the kitchen, I switched to the kitchen camera. Empty. Nothing moved. Maybe it was a shadow from the tree lights? I suggested. "Maybe. Would you mind going over? Just to be sure? I'm probably being paranoid, but..." "No problem. I'll check it out. Thank you so much. Just let me know." At 9:41 p.m., I walked to their house. The street was quiet. Most houses had their lights on. Christmas decorations glowing. The Henderson house looked normal from the outside. Lights on. Tree visible through the window. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Hello," I called out. "Just me." Silence. I walked through the living room. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. I checked the kitchen. The mail was still on the counter. Nothing disturbed. I texted Mrs. Henderson. "Everything looks fine. Must have been a glitch." She replied immediately. "Thank you. Sorry for the false alarm. I was about to leave when I noticed something." The basement door was open again. I stared at it. I'd closed it. I was certain. I walked over and looked down the stairs. The light was off. I could see the bottom step in the dim glow from the kitchen. I flipped the switch. The bulb came on. "Hello." I called down. No response. I descended the stairs slowly. The basement looked the same as before. Boxes, washer, dryer, nothing out of place. I stood there for a moment, listening. The house was silent except for the hum of the furnace. I went back upstairs and closed the basement door. This time I tested it, made sure it latched properly. At 10:03 p.m., I left and locked up. At 10:47 p.m., Mrs. Henderson called again. "I'm so sorry." Another motion alert. Same place. The kitchen. I pulled up the app. The kitchen camera showed nothing. "Empty." "I'm looking at the feed right now," I said. "There's nothing there." "I know, but the app says it detected motion at 10:41. Maybe the camera is malfunctioning. Want me to go back over? Would you mind? I know it's late. I just can't shake this feeling." "It's fine. Give me 5 minutes." At 10:54 p.m., I entered the house again. This time something felt different. The air was colder. Not by much, but enough to notice. "Hello." I called out. Silence. I walked through the living room. The tree lights seemed dimmer. I checked the kitchen. The basement door was open. Wide open this time. My stomach tightened. I took out my phone and called Mrs. Henderson. "The basement door keeps opening," I said. "What do you mean?" "I've closed it twice. It's open again." She was quiet for a moment. "Maybe the latch is broken?" I checked the latch. "It's fine. Is anyone down there?" I walked to the top of the stairs and looked down. The light was off again. "I don't know. I'm checking now." I flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. I tried it again. The bulb didn't come on. "The light's not working," I said. It was fine this morning. There are flashlights in the kitchen drawer. Left of the sink. I found one and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness at the bottom of the stairs. I'm going down, I said. Be careful. I descended slowly, sweeping the flashlight across the basement. Everything looked the same. Boxes, washer, dryer. Then I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Footprints in the dust on the floor. Fresh ones, leading from the stairs to the far corner of the basement. There are footprints down here, I said quietly. What? Someone's been in the basement. Get out. Get out right now. I'm calling the police. I backed toward the stairs, keeping the flashlight aimed at the corner. The footprints ended at a large storage cabinet. I heard something, a scraping sound, coming from inside the cabinet. I ran up the stairs and slammed the basement door. My hands were shaking. At 11:08 p.m., I was standing in the front yard when the police arrived. 2 officers. They went inside with flashlights. I waited outside. They came back 10 minutes later. We checked the whole house, one officer said. Basement included. There's no one here. What about the footprints? What footprints? In the basement. In the dust. Leading to the storage cabinet. We didn't see any footprints. The basement floor is clean. I stared at him. That's impossible. I saw them. Ma'am, we checked thoroughly. The basement is empty. No signs of forced entry. All windows and doors are secure. The other officer spoke up. The bulb in the basement was loose. I tightened it. Works fine now. It wasn't loose. It wouldn't turn on. It's working now. You can check if you want. I followed them inside. We went to the basement door. It was closed. The first officer opened it and flipped the light switch. The bulb came on immediately. We went down. The basement floor was clean. No dust. No footprints. The storage cabinet sat in the corner. Undisturbed. See, the officer said. Nothing here. At 11:34 p.m., the officers left. They filed a report for a false alarm. I called Mrs. Henderson. Told her everything. She said she'd check the camera footage when she got home. Do you want us to come back early? She asked. No. I think I was just seeing things. The police said everything's fine. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. We hung up. At 11:51 p.m., I was locking the front door when I heard something behind me. A voice. From inside the house. Don't leave. I froze with my hand on the doorknob. The voice was quiet. Almost a whisper, but I'd heard it clearly. I turned around slowly. The living room was empty. The tree lights blinked. Red. Green. Red. Green. Hello. I said. Silence. I stood in the doorway, half in, half out. Every instinct told me to leave. Lock the door. Go home. But I couldn't move. The voice came again. From deeper in the house. Please. It sounded like a child. I stepped back inside and closed the door. I walked through the living room toward the kitchen. My phone was in my hand, flashlight on. Is someone there? I called. No answer. I checked the kitchen. Empty. I checked the downstairs bathroom. Nothing. The basement door was closed. I put my hand on the knob. It was cold. Colder than it should have been. I opened it. The light was still on. I could see the stairs. The basement below. Hello. I called down. Down here. The voice was clearer now. Definitely a child. Young. Maybe 7 or 8. Who are you? I asked. I'm stuck. Where are your parents? Please help me. I descended the stairs slowly. The basement was exactly as the police had left it. Boxes. Washer. Dryer. Storage cabinet. Where are you? I said. In here. The voice came from the storage cabinet. I walked toward it. The cabinet was old. Dark wood. 2 doors with brass handles. I reached for the handle. My hand was shaking. Are you in there? I asked. Yes. It's dark. I want to get out. I pulled the door open. The cabinet was empty. Just shelves. Old paint cans. Cleaning supplies. No child. No person. Hello. I said. Silence. I backed away from the cabinet. My heart was pounding. Then I heard something behind me. Breathing. I spun around. No one was there. The breathing continued. Close. Like someone was standing right next to me. I ran for the stairs. The breathing followed. I could hear it behind me. Getting louder. I reached the top and slammed the basement door. I pressed my back against it. The breathing stopped. At 12:03 a.m., I called 911. Someone's in the house, I said. I heard them. In the basement. What's your address? I gave it to them. The same address I'd given an hour ago. Ma'am, we just responded to that location. Officers found nothing. They're still here. I heard a voice. A child. In the basement. Are you in danger right now? I don't know. I locked the basement door. Stay on the line. I'm sending officers back. At 12:11 a.m., the police arrived. Different officers this time. I explained everything. The voice. The breathing. They exchanged a look. We'll check it out, one said. They opened the basement door. Turned on the light. Went down. I waited at the top of the stairs. They were down there for 5 minutes. Then they came back up. There's no one down there, the first officer said. What about the cabinet? Did you check inside? Yes. Empty. Just supplies. I heard a child's voice. They said they were stuck. The second officer stepped forward. Ma'am, have you been drinking tonight? What? No. Any medications? Recreational drugs? No. I heard someone. I'm not making this up. The homeowners, they don't have young children, do they? No. Their kids are teenagers. They're in Boston. And you're sure no neighborhood kids could have gotten in? All the doors were locked. You checked. The officers looked at each other again. We're going to check the whole house one more time, the first officer said. Just to be thorough. They searched every room, every closet, the attic, the garage. Nothing. The house is clear, they told me. We recommend you go home. If the homeowners are concerned, they can contact us when they return. At 12:43 a.m., the officers left. I stood in the living room, staring at the basement door. I walked to it slowly, put my ear against the wood. Silence. I opened it. Just a crack. The light was off. I know I left it on. I watched the officers leave it on. I closed the door and turned the lock. There was a small sliding bolt at the top. I engaged it. Then I grabbed my coat and left. I locked the front door and walked home. I didn't sleep that night. At 7 a.m., Mrs. Henderson called. I reviewed the camera footage, she said, from last night. And the cameras show you entering the house at 10:54. Then again at 11:51. But, she paused. But what? At 11:58, the kitchen camera shows the basement door opening. By itself. You were standing in the living room. Nowhere near it. My stomach dropped. The door just swung open, she continued. Then at 12:01, it closed again. On its own. Did you see anyone? Anything? No. Just the door. Moving. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I think something's wrong with the house, she said quietly. What do you mean? Our daughter. She stopped sleeping in her room 3 months ago. Said she heard whispers. We thought it was nightmares. But now, did you ever check the basement? I asked. No. We never go down there. Not since we moved in. The kids won't go near it. At 9 a.m., the Hendersons came home. They cut their trip short. They called a priest. He came that afternoon. I don't know what he found. The family moved out 2 weeks later. The house has been empty since then. For sale. No one's made an offer. Last month, I drove past it. There was a police car in the driveway. I stopped and asked what happened. The officers said someone had called about screams coming from inside. They checked. The house was empty. No signs of entry. But when they'd gone into the basement, they found something. Scratches on the inside of the storage cabinet door. Like someone had been trying to get out. It was Christmas Eve, and this should never have happened. These are true Christmas Eve horror stories, real people, real nights, real fear. If you enjoy realistic, slow-burn horror, subscribe now. And before the story begins, comment below where are you watching this from right now? Let's begin.